Waitress helped a homeless grandpa every morning, until the billionaire's lawyers walked in with 4 bodyguards. But when they tried dragging him out, she refused, leaving everyone speechless when the truth. Subscribe now, or this might be our last meeting. Follow, comment, and share to stay connected. Don't miss out. Let's dive in. Subscribe now, or this might be our last meeting. Follow, comment, and share to stay connected. Don't miss out. Let's dive in. The rain had been falling for 3 hours straight, turning Michigan Avenue into a river of gray. Lucia Mendoza wiped down the counter of the Sunset Diner for the 4th time that morning, her movements automatic after 3 years of practice. The neon sign above the door flickered. Half the letters had been dead for months, and nobody cared enough to fix them. More coffee, Sam? The old man looked up from his empty plate, his weathered face breaking into a gentle smile. You're too kind to me, mija. Lucia poured the coffee anyway, ignoring the familiar ache in her chest. Sam had been coming here every morning for 6 months, always sitting in the same booth by the frost-covered window. He never asked for anything, always left his table cleaner than he'd found it. She'd started bringing him breakfast without charging, eggs, toast, sometimes a sandwich she'd make during her break. It's just food, Sam, nothing important. But it was important. In a life stripped of everything that mattered, her career, her reputation, her future, these small acts of kindness were the only thing keeping her human. Through the rain-streaked glass, she watched 4 black SUVs pull up to the curb in perfect formation. Her stomach dropped. Sarah, she called to the other waitress. Did someone order catering? Sarah barely glanced up from her phone. Not that I know of. The first SUV's doors opened. 4 men in charcoal suits stepped out, their movements synchronized like soldiers. They didn't run through the rain. They walked with the kind of confidence that came from never worrying about getting wet. Expensive suits could be replaced. Lucia's hands trembled as she set down the coffee pot. The door swung open, and the men entered in a silent line. No greeting, no acknowledgement of the other customers. They positioned themselves near the entrance, hands clasped in front of them, scanning the small diner like it was a crime scene. Then he walked in. Alexander Hawthorne didn't look like someone who belonged in a place like the Sunset Diner. His black wool coat probably cost more than Lucia made in 6 months. Dark hair, steel gray eyes, and a jaw so sharp it could cut glass. 4 bodyguards flanked him, their presence filling the cramped space with suffocating tension. His gaze swept across the diner and landed directly on Sam. Mr. Hawthorne. His voice was cold, clipped. You've been missing for 3 weeks. The doctors have been looking for you. Lucia's heart hammered against her ribs. Hawthorne. No, it couldn't be. Sam's hand tightened around his coffee cup, but he said nothing. Alexander moved closer, his expensive shoes clicking against the worn linoleum. You disappeared from the care facility without telling anyone. Do you have any idea how many people have been searching for you? Before she could think, Lucia stepped between them. He's eating breakfast. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. You can wait. The entire diner went silent. Even the sizzle of the grill seemed to fade. The lawyers exchanged glances, their expressions ranging from shock to barely concealed amusement. Nobody spoke to a Hawthorne like that. Alexander's eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, she forgot how to breathe. There was coldness there, calculation, control, but also something else. Surprise, maybe. Curiosity. And you are? His tone suggested he already knew the answer wouldn't matter. Someone who actually pays attention to him. Lucia crossed her arms, ignoring the way her pulse raced. He comes here every morning. He eats, he rests, and then he leaves. Nobody bothers him. Nobody treats him like a problem to be solved. One of the lawyers leaned closer to Alexander, whispering something too quiet for Lucia to hear. Whatever he said made Alexander's expression shift just slightly, but enough that ice slid down her spine. Sam's weathered hand reached out and pressed against hers. His grip was weak but determined. I'm not going, the old man said softly. Not yet. Alexander's jaw tightened. Father, I trust her. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Lucia felt the weight of every eye in the diner, customers pretending not to watch. Sarah frozen, mid-pour, the cook visible through the kitchen window. One of the lawyers cleared his throat. Mr. Hawthorne, perhaps we should find out who she is. Alexander interrupted, his gaze never leaving Lucia's face. Everything. Employment history, background, residence. I want it in the next hour. Her blood turned to ice. Before anyone could respond, the door opened again. A man in a tailored navy suit stepped inside, shaking rain from his shoulders with casual arrogance. Grant Devlin, 3 years older, more expensive watch, same predatory smile. His eyes found Lucia immediately. Well, Devlin's voice carried across the diner like poison. Lucia Mendoza. I'd heard rumors you'd fallen far, but a waitress? He turned to Alexander with mock concern. Mr. Hawthorne, I hope you're aware of who you're dealing with. This woman is a criminal. The word detonated like a grenade. Lucia's vision blurred at the edges. Not here, not now, not again. Alexander's attention shifted fully to Lucia, his expression unreadable but his posture radiating dangerous focus. Explain why you're protecting my father. Because he needed help. Lucia forced herself to meet his gaze, even as shame burned through her chest. He was hungry, that's all. That's all. Devlin laughed, the sound sharp and mocking. Come now, Lucia. We both know you're more strategic than that. A vulnerable elderly man, heir to a billion-dollar empire, perfect target for someone with your history. The diner had gone completely silent. Mrs. Chen, the regular at table 3, clutched her purse. 2 construction workers near the back booth stared openly. Even Sarah had stopped pretending to work. I don't know what he's talking about, Lucia said, but her voice wavered. Don't you? Devlin pulled out his phone, tapping the screen with deliberate slowness. Alexander, 3 years ago, Ms. Mendoza was fired from the Chicago Museum of Heritage, falsifying documents, forging provenance certificates for artifacts. She was caught red-handed trying to sell stolen pieces to private collectors. That's not true. The words burst out before she could stop them. You know that's not true. Alexander's eyes narrowed, studying her with the intensity of someone accustomed to reading people for profit. She could see him cataloging details, the way she stood, the cultured precision of her speech despite the cheap uniform, the education buried beneath 3 years of survival. Run a full background check, he ordered one of the lawyers without looking away from her. Financial records, criminal history, everything. The lawyer nodded and stepped outside, phone already at his ear. Rain hammered against the windows now, the storm intensifying. Water streamed down the glass in sheets, distorting the world outside into a blur of gray and shadow. The diner felt smaller with each passing second, like the walls were closing in. Sam tried to speak, but a violent cough cut him off. His shoulders shook, his face flushing red as he struggled for air. Lucia moved instinctively toward him, but Alexander was faster. How long has he been coughing like this? Alexander demanded, his hand on his father's shoulder. A few days. Lucia grabbed a glass of water, her hands shaking. He wouldn't go to a doctor. I tried. You tried? Alexander's voice could have frozen fire. My father is 78 years old with a compromised immune system, and you let him sit in this disease-ridden. He cut himself off, jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscle jump. This is your fault. The accusation hit like a physical blow. My fault? Something inside Lucia snapped. I'm the one who made sure he ate every day. I'm the one who gave him a warm place to sit when it was freezing outside. Where were you? Where were all of you with your lawyers and your SUVs and your billion-dollar empire? You don't know anything about my family. I know abandonment when I see it. The words hung between them, sharp and unforgivable. Alexander's expression went completely blank, the kind of emptiness that came before an explosion. Devlin stepped forward, his smile widening. Alexander, I understand you're upset, but consider the facts. Your father disappears from a secure facility. Weeks later, he's found in a diner, being cared for by a woman with a documented history of fraud and manipulation. She's using him. Can't you see that? I'm not using anyone, Lucia said, but even she could hear how desperate it sounded. Alexander pulled out his phone, typing rapidly. I want security footage from this location for the past 6 months. And get Dr. Morrison here immediately. I want my father examined. Sir, perhaps we should move Mr. Hawthorne too. He's not going anywhere until I understand what's happening here. Alexander turned back to Lucia, and there was something almost frightening in his gaze. Not anger, but calculation. You're educated, articulate. You don't belong here any more than my father does. So tell me, Ms. Mendoza, what are you really after? The question pierced straight through her carefully constructed armor. What was she after? Survival, invisibility, a life where the past couldn't reach her. But the past had found her anyway. She could feel it closing in, Devlin's satisfied smirk, Alexander's cold suspicion, the whispers of the other customers. 3 years of hiding, 3 years of building a quiet, invisible existence, and it was all crumbling in real time. "I was just trying to help," she whispered. "People like you don't just help." Devlin moved closer, invading her space with practiced ease. "You calculate, you scheme, you prey on the vulnerable." He turned to Alexander. "I'd be happy to provide you with the full case files from the museum investigation. You'll see exactly what kind of person you're dealing with." Sam's hand shot out, gripping Lucia's wrist with surprising strength. His eyes met hers, watery but determined. "She saved me," he rasped between coughs. "Every day." But Alexander wasn't listening anymore. He was watching Lucia with the expression of someone solving a puzzle, and she knew what he'd find when he looked deep enough. The persecution had begun again. Grant Devlin stood in his corner office on the 42nd floor of the Sterling building, watching the rain batter against the glass. Below, Chicago spread out like a chessboard, and he'd just spotted his opponent's most vulnerable piece. Lucia Mendoza, still alive, still dangerous. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he'd used only twice before. "I need you to spread a story. The Hawthorne heir's father is being manipulated by a convicted fraudster. She's using the old man to extort money from the family. Make it sound concerned, like we're worried about elder abuse." The voice on the other end confirmed the assignment. Devlin ended the call and opened his laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard. Within an hour, he'd compiled a file thick with carefully doctored evidence, bank statements showing mysterious deposits that didn't exist, emails he'd forged 3 years ago and saved for exactly this moment, even a fabricated police report suggesting Lucia had been investigated for similar schemes in the past. He slipped everything into an unmarked manila envelope and handed it to his assistant. "Courier this to Hawthorne Tower. Anonymous delivery. Make sure it reaches Alexander's desk directly." "Yes, sir." Devlin watched her leave, satisfaction warming his chest. Lucia had been a problem 3 years ago, brilliant, principled, dangerously close to exposing his entire operation. He'd destroyed her once. He could do it again. His phone buzzed. A text from one of his contacts at the Chicago Tribune, hearing rumors about the Hawthorne situation. Care to comment? Perfect. The story was already spreading. Alexander Hawthorne sat in his office at midnight, the city glittering below him like scattered diamonds. The manila envelope lay open on his desk, its contents spread across the polished mahogany surface. Financial records, emails, incident reports. Every piece of evidence pointed to the same conclusion. Lucia Mendoza was exactly what Devlin claimed, a con artist who'd found the perfect mark. But something didn't fit. Alexander picked up one of the emails, studying the timestamp. The language was formal, calculated. Nothing like the woman who'd stood between him and his father with fire in her eyes, defending an old man who had nothing to offer her. His phone rang. Marcus Chen, his head of security. "Sir, we're getting press inquiries about your father and the woman from the diner. Someone leaked the story. Kill it." "I'm trying, but it's spreading fast. 3 outlets have already called asking for comment on the elderly exploitation scandal." Alexander ended the call and stared at the documents. Logic told him to trust the evidence. Instinct whispered something else entirely. Lucia arrived at the diner the next morning to find a small crowd gathered outside. Cameras, reporters. Her stomach plummeted. "Ms. Mendoza," a woman with a microphone pushed forward. "Is it true you've been manipulating Samuel Hawthorne for financial gain?" Lucia ducked her head and pushed through to the entrance. Inside, the atmosphere had shifted. Mrs. Chen, who'd been coming here for 5 years, wouldn't meet her eyes. The construction workers whispered and stared. "Lucia," Sarah pulled her aside, voice low. "People are talking. They're saying you're some kind of criminal." "I'm not." But what could she say? That she'd been framed 3 years ago? That the real criminal was free while she served coffee to survive? "I just need to work." She tied on her apron with shaking hands, trying to focus on the familiar routine. Refill coffee, take orders, clear tables, breathe. A man she'd never seen before sat at the counter, watching her with undisguised suspicion. "You're the one taking advantage of that old man, aren't you?" "I didn't do anything wrong." "That's what they all say." She turned away before he could see the tears burning her eyes. Sam arrived an hour later, looking frailer than ever. He slid into his usual booth. and Lucia brought him coffee without being asked. Mija. His weathered hand covered hers. I see what they're doing to you. I'm so sorry. It's not your fault. But her voice cracked on the words. My son. He doesn't know the truth yet, but he will. Sam squeezed her hand gently. You're a good person, Lucia. Don't let them make you forget that. She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe that truth mattered, that innocence meant something. But she'd learned 3 years ago that the world didn't work that way. The pulsera appeared in her locker 2 days later. Lucia stared at the delicate platinum bracelet, her blood turning to ice. She'd never seen it before. Intricate filigree work, clearly expensive, definitely not hers. She reached for it with trembling hands, and that's when Alexander walked through the door. 4 security guards flanked him. His face was carved from stone. Where did you get it? I didn't. Lucia looked down at the bracelet in her palm, realization crashing over her like a wave. This was planted. Someone put this here. That bracelet belonged to my mother. Alexander's voice could have shattered glass. It's been missing from the family estate for 6 months. And now it's in your possession. I've never stolen anything in my life. The evidence suggests otherwise. He nodded to one of the guards, who stepped forward with the evidence bag. We'll need that. The diner had gone completely silent again. Every customer, every employee, watching her humiliation unfold in real time. Sarah stood frozen by the register, mouth open. The cook had emerged from the kitchen, dish towel still in hand. Please. Lucia's voice broke. I didn't take this. You have to believe me. I don't have to believe anything. Alexander's gray eyes were colder than she'd ever seen them. 3 years ago, you were caught falsifying museum documents. Now you're found with stolen property belonging to my family. The pattern is clear. The pattern is that someone is framing me. She was shouting now, desperation clawing at her throat. Can't you see that? This is exactly what happened before. Evidence that appears out of nowhere, accusations I can't defend against. Someone wants to destroy me. Or you're exactly what you appear to be, a criminal who preys on vulnerable people. The words hit like physical blows. Lucia felt something inside her crack, not break, but fracture in a way that might never fully heal. I thought, her voice came out barely above a whisper, I thought you were different. I thought you might actually see past the lies. I see the evidence. She yanked off her apron and threw it on the counter. Through the window, she could see more reporters gathering, cameras ready. The walls were closing in again, just like 3 years ago. The same accusations, the same helplessness, the same crushing weight of injustice. Lucia walked out into the rain without looking back. The water soaked through her clothes within seconds, cold and relentless. She didn't care. Behind her, she could hear cameras clicking, voices calling her name, demanding answers she didn't have. History was repeating itself, and this time, she had nowhere left to fall. Brian Cole had been a journalist for 11 years, long enough to recognize when a story didn't add up. He sat in his cramped apartment at 2 in the morning, surrounded by printouts and digital files, piecing together the Lucia Mendoza case like a puzzle with too many missing pieces. The original museum scandal had been covered extensively, Chicago Tribune, Sun-Times, even a segment on local news. Promising young curator caught falsifying documents, fired in disgrace, narrowly avoided prison time. Case closed. Except it wasn't. Brian highlighted another inconsistency. The timestamps on the supposedly falsified emails didn't match the server logs. The handwriting analysis had been conducted by a firm with ties to Grant Devlin's consulting company. 3 witnesses who'd initially supported Lucia's version of events had suddenly recanted, all within the same 48-hour period. Someone buried you, he muttered, reaching for his phone. He found Lucia's number through old museum directories and dialed. It went straight to voicemail. He tried again an hour later. Same result. The woman was either hiding or had given up entirely. Alexander stood in his father's hospital room, watching the old man sleep. Pneumonia, the doctor said. Mild, but concerning given his age and existing conditions. Sam had been transferred here 2 days ago, and Alexander had barely left his side. Guilt was an unfamiliar emotion. He'd built an empire by making calculated decisions, trusting evidence over instinct, logic over sentiment. But standing here now, watching his father's chest rise and fall with labored breaths, he couldn't shake the image of Lucia's face when he'd accused her. I thought you were different. He pulled out his phone and opened the file his team had compiled on her. Lucia Elena Mendoza, 29 years old. Degree in art history from Northwestern. Master's in museum studies from University of Chicago. She'd been brilliant, papers published, exhibitions curated, a rising star in the field. Then nothing. 3 years of working minimum wage jobs, moving between cheap apartments, disappearing from public record. Alexander scrolled through the emails allegedly sent by her. Something nagged at him, the phrasing, the formal structure. He'd read hundreds of thousands of emails in his career. These felt manufactured. His phone buzzed. Marcus Chen. Sir, one of the security guards from the diner just came forward. Says he saw Grant Devlin near the staff area 3 nights ago, around closing time. Thought it was strange, but didn't report it. Alexander's jaw tightened. Why is he telling us now? Says his conscience has been bothering him, especially after seeing the news coverage. Send me everything you have on Devlin. Financial records, business dealings, personal history. I want it in an hour. He ended the call and turned back to his father. Sam's eyes had opened, lucid despite the illness. Alexander. His voice was weak but steady. We need to talk about Grant. Rest, father. We can discuss business later. Not business. Truth. Sam struggled to sit up, and Alexander moved quickly to help him. That boy, he's not what you think. Never has been. What do you mean? When he worked at the museum before the scandal, Sam coughed, reaching for water. Alexander handed it to him. There were rumors, pieces going missing, documents altered. The board was investigating quietly. Then suddenly, Lucia was accused, and everything went quiet. Alexander's pulse quickened. Why didn't you tell me this before? I had no proof, just an old man's suspicions. Sam's eyes met his, sharp despite the exhaustion. But I saw how she treated me, son. Every morning for 6 months. She never asked for anything, never took anything, just cared. People like that don't suddenly become criminals. The words settled over Alexander like lead weight. Brian Cole appeared at Hawthorne Tower the next morning, carrying a folder thick with documentation. He'd called ahead, explaining he had information about the Mendoza case. Alexander's assistant had tried to put him off, but Brian had been persistent. Mr. Hawthorne. Brian spread the documents across the conference room table. I've been investigating Lucia Mendoza's original case. These are the server logs from the museum. They show the falsified emails were created from an IP address registered to Devlin Consulting Group. These are witness statements that were never included in the official file. And this, he pulled out a photograph. This is Grant Devlin having dinner with the judge who oversaw Lucia's hearing, 3 days before the verdict. Alexander studied each document with the focused intensity that had made him one of Chicago's most successful businessmen. The pattern was unmistakable once you knew to look for it. Devlin had orchestrated the entire thing, framing Lucia, manipulating evidence, silencing witnesses, and Alexander had believed him without question. Where is she now? Alexander's voice came out rougher than intended. I don't know. She's not answering her phone. Hasn't been back to the diner. Alexander pulled out his phone and called Marcus. Find Lucia Mendoza. Last known address, friends, family. I don't care what it takes. Find her. He ended the call and turned back to Brian. I need copies of everything you have. Already made them. Brian pushed a flash drive across the table. Mr. Hawthorne, what are you going to do? Alexander looked at the documents spread before him, evidence of his catastrophic failure of judgment. He'd spent his entire life reading people, identifying threats, protecting his interests, and he'd gotten this completely, devastatingly wrong. I'm going to fix this. Lucia's apartment was in a building that should have been condemned years ago. Alexander climbed the stairs. The elevator had an out-of-order sign that looked permanent and stopped at number 3C. He knocked. Silence. Lucia, it's Alexander Hawthorne. I need to talk to you. Nothing. He tried again, louder. I know you're in there. I know you have no reason to trust me, but I was wrong about everything. Please. The door remained closed. After 10 minutes of knocking, Alexander finally left, the weight of his mistakes crushing down on his shoulders. Inside apartment 3C, Lucia sat with her back against the door, tears streaming down her face. In her hands, she clutched a worn manila envelope, the only copies of the real documents from the museum, the proof she'd carried for 3 years, too afraid to use it because showing her face meant risking everything all over again. She heard Alexander's footsteps fade down the hallway. Part of her wanted to open the door to show him the truth, but the larger part, the part that had been destroyed once already, couldn't bear to be heard again. Alexander stood in his office 3 days later, the gala invitation on his desk mocking him. Annual Hawthorne Foundation fundraiser, Chicago's elite gathered to celebrate philanthropy while protecting their fortunes. Devlin would be there. The press would be there. Perfect. He picked up his phone and called Brian Cole. How would you like an exclusive story? What kind of story? The kind that destroys a corrupt millionaire and clears an innocent woman's name. Alexander opened his laptop, pulling up the presentation he'd been building. We're going to expose everything, publicly, at the gala. That's social suicide. Your reputation. My reputation isn't worth protecting if it's built on lies. Alexander saved the file and sent it to his team. Get me everything you can find on Devlin's dealings. Every shady transaction, every suspicious connection. We have 4 days. He ended the call and looked out at the city. Somewhere out there, Lucia was hiding, believing herself alone. He was going to prove her wrong. Brian Cole's apartment had transformed into a war room. Documents covered every surface, witness statements, financial records, shipping manifests for artifacts that had disappeared from museum inventory. Alexander stood by the window, phone pressed to his ear. I don't care if she's scared. Find her. He ended the call and turned to Brian. How many witnesses do we have? 4 confirmed, 2 more maybes. Brian highlighted a name on his list. Teresa Alvarez worked in the museum's archival department. Says Devlin pressured her to alter digital records. She refused and was fired 2 weeks later. Why didn't she come forward before? Same reason none of them did. Devlin's connected. Powerful. People who cross him tend to lose more than their jobs. Alexander's phone buzzed. Marcus Chen. Sir, we found her. Northwestern Hospital. Visiting your father. Lucia sat beside Sam's bed, holding his weathered hand. The old man looked better today, color returning to his cheeks, breathing easier. You shouldn't be here, Mika. It's not safe. I needed to see you were okay. I'm an old man with pneumonia. I'll survive. Sam squeezed her hand. But you can't keep running. I'm not running. I'm surviving. That's not living. His eyes met hers, steady and certain. My son, he's stubborn, but he's good, and he's trying to make this right. Let him. The door opened. Alexander stood in the doorway, eyes finding Lucia immediately. May I have a moment? Sam nodded encouragingly. Alexander stepped fully into the room. I was wrong. The words came out rough. About you, about everything. Devlin manipulated evidence, bribed witnesses, destroyed your career, and I believed him without question. He pulled out his phone, showing her photographs of documents. I have proof now, but I need your help. The original documents you kept, we need them. Lucia's breath caught. How did you? Because you're not a criminal. Criminals don't keep evidence of their own guilt. His eyes held something raw. You kept them because you knew someday the truth would matter. I'm asking you to let it matter now. Why should I trust you? The question came out sharp. You've accused me twice, humiliated me publicly. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to trust yourself. Trust that you deserve justice. Sam coughed softly. He's right, Mija. It's time to stop hiding. Lucia closed her eyes, feeling 3 years of fear pressing down. Maybe it was time to face it head on. The documents are in my apartment, hidden. We can go together. No. She met his gaze directly. I'll bring them, but I'm doing this for me, not for you. Something flickered across Alexander's face. Respect, maybe. Fair enough. 2 days later, they sat in Alexander's office. The real documents spread beside Devlin's forgeries. The differences were unmistakable. Signatures that didn't quite match. Dates contradicting shipping records. Sections altered with traceable editing software. These artifacts are worth millions. Brian pointed to a list. And according to these manifests, they were sold to private collectors in 3 countries, while the museum reported them damaged or lost. Alexander studied the evidence. Brilliant. Illegal, but brilliant. Lucia traced a finger over one document, her original report flagging discrepancies, dated 6 months before she'd been fired. I found the first irregularities in January. By March, I had enough to prove fraud. That's when Devlin struck. The gala is in 2 days, Brian said. Every major donor will be there. Perfect stage for exposure. Alexander started typing on his phone. I'm sending invitations to every investigative journalist in Chicago. Off-the-record briefing an hour before. Devlin will run. Let him try. Alexander made another call. Marcus, I need surveillance on Grant Devlin. If he attempts to leave the city, I want to know immediately. He looked at Lucia. You'll need to speak. At the gala. Tell your story. Her stomach dropped. In front of everyone? Your voice is the only one that can cut through the noise. That night, Lucia practiced her statement in Brian's apartment. Her hands shook so badly the paper rattled. 3 years ago, I discovered systematic fraud. Her voice cracked. Breathe. Brian leaned forward. You don't have to be perfect, just honest. What if they don't believe me? Then we show them the evidence. Alexander appeared in the doorway with coffee. You documented everything. That's not something a guilty person does. They worked for hours, refining the presentation, coordinating with journalists, ensuring every piece of evidence was airtight. Around midnight, Alexander's phone rang. Sir, Devlin just booked a flight to the Cayman Islands. Leaves tomorrow afternoon. Alexander smiled coldly. File an emergency injunction. Suspected flight risk. I want him grounded. He looked at Lucia and Brian. One more day. We expose everything at the gala, or we lose him forever. Lucia thought about Sam in his hospital bed. About the years spent invisible. About every morning serving coffee while dying inside. Then let's make sure we don't lose. The grand ballroom of the Drake Hotel glittered like a dream. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across marble floors. Men in tuxedos and women in designer gowns circulated, discussing portfolios and philanthropy with practiced ease. Lucia stood near the service entrance, wearing a simple black dress Brian's sister had lent her. Her hands were clenched so tightly her nails dug into her palms. You don't have to watch, Brian said beside her. We can wait in the prep room. No. Lucia forced herself to breathe. I need to see this. Across the room, Grant Devlin made his entrance. Tailored tuxedo, diamond cufflinks, 3 assistants trailing behind. He worked the crowd with practiced charm, looking untouchable. Lucia's stomach churned. He doesn't know yet, Brian murmured. About the injunction, the investigation. Alexander appeared on stage, microphone in hand. The crowd quieted, turning their attention forward. Thank you all for coming. Alexander's voice carried across the ballroom. Before we discuss this year's donations, I need to address a matter of urgent importance. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Devlin's smile faltered. 3 years ago, a young curator named Lucia Mendoza was fired from the Chicago Museum of Heritage, accused of falsifying documents and stealing artifacts. Alexander paused, eyes finding Devlin. Those accusations were lies. The room erupted in shocked whispers. If you'll direct your attention to the screens. The lights dimmed. Massive displays lit up behind Alexander, showing side-by-side comparisons. On the left, the forged emails. On the right, the originals, complete with metadata showing they'd been created from Devlin's IP address. Gasps echoed through the ballroom. Camera flashes began popping. These documents show systematic fraud spanning 5 years. Artifacts worth over $40 million were stolen and sold to private collectors. The real curator who discovered this, Lucia Mendoza, was framed to protect the actual criminal. Another slide appeared. Shipping manifests. Bank records showing offshore accounts. Photographs of damaged artifacts appearing in private collections. Devlin pushed through the crowd, face red. This is outrageous. These documents are fabricated. They're authenticated. Brian stepped forward with a folder. I have sworn statements from 4 witnesses, all willing to testify. The screens changed. Audio played, a recorded phone conversation. Devlin's voice unmistakable as he negotiated selling a Byzantine icon. That's not me. Voice analysis confirms it's you. Alexander descended from the stage. Along with evidence of bribery, witness intimidation, and conspiracy. The crowd parted around Devlin like he was radioactive. You're protecting a criminal. Devlin pointed at Lucia. She's manipulating all of you. She saved my life. Every head turned. Sam Hawthorne stood near the entrance, supported by a nurse but upright. For 6 months, this woman fed me, kept me warm, treated me like a human being when I had nothing. Sam moved slowly toward the center. She never asked for money, never asked for anything. She's the most honest person in this room. Sirens wailed outside. Police cars were visible through the tall windows, lights painting the night red and blue. Officers entered, badges displayed. The lead detective approached Devlin. Grant Devlin, you're under arrest for fraud, theft, and conspiracy. This is a mistake. Devlin tried to pull away, but officers gripped his arms. I'm a respected businessman. Enough. Alexander's voice cut through the chaos. You destroyed an innocent woman's life to protect your criminal enterprise. You're done. Cameras flashed as officers led Devlin toward the exit. The crowd watched in stunned silence. Alexander turned to Lucia, extending his hand. "Come up here." She hesitated, every instinct screaming to stay hidden. But Sam was nodding encouragingly. She walked through the crowd on shaking legs. Alexander handed her the microphone. "Tell them." Lucia looked out at the sea of faces. Chicago's elite. The people who'd ignored her for 3 years. "My name is Lucia Elena Mendoza." Her voice came out stronger than expected. 3 years ago, I was destroyed for telling the truth. Tonight, I'm reclaiming my name. She held up the worn manila envelope. The proof, the evidence, the truth. I'm not a criminal. I never was, and I refuse to be invisible anymore. The ballroom erupted in applause. Lucia stood in the spotlight, tears streaming down her face, finally free. The morning after the gala, Chicago woke up to headlines that would dominate the news cycle for weeks. Chicago Tribune, Billionaire exposes museum. Fraud, innocent curator. Vindicated after 3 years. Sun-Times, Grant Devlin arrested. $40 million art theft scheme unraveled. Lucia sat in her cramped apartment, scrolling through article after article. The vindication felt surreal, like she might wake up and find it had all been a dream. Her phone rang. An unknown number. "Ms. Mendoza, this is Patricia Wong from the Art Institute of Chicago. We'd like to discuss a consulting position in our preservation department." 3 more calls came that morning. 2 museums, 1 private foundation, all offering opportunities she'd thought were gone forever. At Hawthorne Tower, Alexander faced a room full of angry shareholders. Marcus Blackwell, the largest investor after Alexander, stood with barely controlled fury. "You publicly humiliated this company. Do you have any idea what this has done to our stock price?" "I exposed corruption," Alexander replied evenly, "and prevented us from being complicit in $40 million fraud. Our stock will recover. Our reputation would not have. You should have handled this privately." There was no private solution. Alexander stood, buttoning his jacket. "Which is why I'm temporarily stepping down as CEO while we conduct a full audit of every museum partnership, every cultural investment, every grant we've approved in the past decade." The room erupted in protests. "Victoria Chen will serve as interim CEO. She has my complete confidence." He walked out before anyone could argue. Brian Cole worked 18-hour days, assembling the definitive account of the scandal. His editor had given him front page and a 4-part series. But what mattered more were the calls he'd been receiving. Former employees, curators, archivists, who'd been silenced by Devlin. "There are at least 12 other victims," Brian told Alexander. "Professionals whose careers were ruined because they got too close to the truth." "Document everything," Alexander said. "When this goes to trial, I want the full scope visible." At Northwestern Hospital, Sam sat up in bed, breathing easier. The pneumonia had cleared, and with it, the fog that had clouded his mind. Alexander visited every evening, and for the first time in years they actually talked. "I pushed you too hard," Sam said one night, "after your mother died. Expected you to fill shoes nobody could fill. You were grieving. I was a coward. Easier to bury myself in work. Make you the same." Sam looked at his weathered hands. "Didn't realize I was teaching you to trust numbers more than people." Alexander was silent. "I failed her. Lucia. I had every tool at my disposal, and I used all of them to believe a lie because it was convenient. So you fix it. Not with money, with time, with showing up." Lucia stood outside the small house in Pilsen, her childhood home. She hadn't been here in months, too ashamed to face her mother with nothing to show for 3 years. She knocked. Elena Mendoza opened the door, and the moment she saw Lucia's face, tears began streaming. She pulled her daughter into a fierce embrace. "I saw the news. All of it. Mi amor, I'm so sorry you went through this alone. I didn't want you to worry. I'm your mother. Worrying is my job." Elena cupped Lucia's face in her work-worn hands. "You should have told me. Should have let me help. There was nothing you could do. I could have reminded you who you are." Elena's eyes were fierce despite the tears. "You're my daughter. You don't give up. You fight." They stood in the doorway, holding each other, and for the first time in 3 years, Lucia felt like she could breathe. The next morning, Alexander walked into the Sunset Diner. No SUVs, no bodyguards, no lawyers. Just a man in jeans and a sweater. Sarah dropped a coffee pot. Alexander ignored her and walked to the booth where Sam used to sit. Lucia emerged from the back, stopping short when she saw him. "I didn't order anything yet," Alexander said. "Thought I should wait for the waitress." She approached slowly, pulling out her order pad. "What can I get you?" "Coffee, black, and whatever you recommend." "Pancakes are good today." "Then pancakes." She returned with his order. Alexander gestured to the seat across from him. "Will you sit, please?" She hesitated, then slid into the booth. "I've been thinking about pride, about fear." Alexander wrapped his hands around the coffee cup. "About how many times I chose certainty over truth because truth required admitting I was wrong." "You weren't the only one who lied." Lucia's voice was quiet. "When you first came here, when I realized who Sam was, I should have told you, but I was terrified. I gave you every reason to be terrified, and I gave you every reason not to trust me. I lied about my identity, hid my past, protected someone I barely knew because it felt safer than being honest. You protected him because it was the right thing to do." Alexander leaned forward. "Everything I've learned about you, you've never taken the easy path, never chosen safety over principle. That's courage." It didn't feel like courage. "Then we're both learning the difference." He paused. "I can't undo what I did, can't erase the 3 years you spent invisible, but I can promise I'll spend however long it takes proving I see you now. Really see you." Lucia felt something crack open in her chest, not breaking, but allowing space for something new. "Slowly," she said. "We rebuild this slowly. No grand gestures." "Slowly," Alexander agreed. "One conversation at a time." Alexander stood before the Hawthorne Foundation Board 3 weeks later with a proposal that would have seemed insane a month ago. The Preservation Integrity Initiative, a fully funded foundation dedicated to preventing corruption in museums and cultural institutions. Independent audits, whistleblower protections, legal support for professionals who expose fraud. Victoria Chen raised an eyebrow. "That's ambitious and expensive. I'm funding it personally. $20 million to start." Alexander advanced to the next slide. "We'll need a technical director, someone with curatorial experience and intimate knowledge of how these systems can be manipulated. You have someone in mind?" "Lucia Mendoza, if she'll take the position." Marcus Blackwell cleared his throat. "That's bold. Given the publicity." "Given the publicity, she's the only person with the credibility to do this. She exposed $40 million fraud that nobody else caught." Alexander met each board member's eyes. "She's exactly who we need." The vote passed. Narrowly, but it passed. Lucia sat in the small office space Alexander had secured, reviewing the proposal. It was everything she'd dreamed of, the chance to protect historical artifacts, prevent corruption, help others who'd been silenced. But accepting meant stepping back into the spotlight. Her phone rang. Her mother. "Did you see the proposal?" "I'm looking at it now, Mama." "And?" "It's terrifying." Elena laughed softly. "Good things usually are. But tell me, do you want to do this?" Lucia looked at the documents. "Yes, I want to do this." "Then you already have your answer." The next morning, Lucia called Alexander and accepted the position. The foundation's first public event was a small fundraiser. 50 donors, local press, board members from 3 museums. Elena arrived early, carrying a garment bag. "I made you something." She pulled out a dress, deep burgundy, elegantly simple, with hand-stitched details that must have taken hours. "Mama, you didn't have to." "Yes, I did. You're stepping back into the world. You should do it wearing something made with love." When Lucia emerged, Alexander stopped mid-conversation. "You look professional. Very professional." Sam, recovered enough to attend in a wheelchair, chuckled. "Smooth, son, very smooth." Brian's series had been published to acclaim, and the fallout was spreading. 2 days after the fundraiser, he received a tip. "You're investigating Devlin? Look at the Norton Gallery in Boston. Same pattern, curator fired, artifacts missing." Brian spent a week chasing the lead, then presented his findings. "It's not just Devlin. There's a network. We can confirm 17 victims. Probably more." Within a month, the Foundation's hotline was flooded with calls. Curators, archivists, researchers, people who'd been destroyed or silenced. Each one with a story eerily similar to Lucia's. She worked 18-hour days, reviewing cases, connecting victims with legal support. Alexander provided resources and late-night coffee runs when she refused to leave. Sam attended strategy meetings, his mind sharp again. Elena organized fundraiser catering, donating her time. One evening, Lucia was alone in the archives when she found something that made her heart stop. A photograph. A 14th century illuminated manuscript reported destroyed in the original museum fire, the catalyst for her investigation 3 years ago. Except here it was, in a private collection catalog from 18 months ago. Alexander, she called immediately. I found one of the pieces. The one Devlin claimed was destroyed. He arrived within 30 minutes. Together they traced the manuscript's journey from the museum, through shell companies, to a collector in Geneva. This is the key, Alexander said. This proves Devlin's operation predates your involvement, predates everything. They worked until 3 in the morning. When Lucia finally looked up, she found Alexander watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. What? You're brilliant. Watching how your mind connects these patterns? He shook his head. Devlin wasn't trying to destroy you. He was terrified of you. Something shifted between them. Not dramatic, not sudden, just recognition that what had started as guilt and redemption had evolved into something more. Respect, admiration, the foundation of trust. We should get some rest, Lucia said, but didn't move. We should, Alexander agreed, not moving either. They sat in comfortable silence, two people learning to rebuild, one late night at a time. Lucia was alone in the Foundation's archive room when she heard the glass shatter. It was nearly midnight. She'd stayed late organizing newly recovered documents, shipping manifests, authentication certificates, correspondence that would form the backbone of 3 separate fraud cases. The building should have been empty, except for the night security guard. The sound came from the front office. Her heart hammered as she stood slowly, listening. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate. She reached for her phone just as the archive room door slammed open. The man was large, dressed in black, face partially covered. He moved with purpose, heading straight for the filing cabinets where the most sensitive documents were stored. The building's locked, Lucia said, trying to keep her voice steady. Security's already been notified. He ignored her, pulling a crowbar from his jacket and jamming it into the first cabinet. Metal shrieked as the lock broke. Stop. Lucia moved without thinking, grabbing his arm. He shoved her backward. She hit the desk hard enough to knock the wind from her lungs. He returned to the cabinet, pulling out files and throwing them on the floor. Lucia's hand found the silent alarm button under the desk. She pressed it 3 times, the emergency code. The man realized what she'd done. He turned, crowbar raised, and for one terrifying moment, she thought he might use it. Instead, he grabbed a stack of documents and a laptop, then swept his arm across the desk, sending evidence crashing to the floor. Tell Mendoza to back off. This is just a warning. He kicked over a filing cabinet on his way out. Lucia heard him running, glass breaking, then a car alarm. She sat on the floor among the wreckage, shaking so badly she could barely hold her phone when she called Alexander. Someone broke in. He took files. Destroyed. Her voice cracked. Are you hurt? No, but don't move. I'm 10 minutes away. Alexander arrived in 8 minutes. He found Lucia still on the floor, surrounded by scattered documents, trying to organize them with trembling hands. Lucia. He knelt beside her, gently taking the papers from her grip. Stop. Just stop. I need to fix this. You need to let me help. His hands covered hers, steady and warm. Please. She looked up at him, and something in his expression, fear, genuine fear, made her finally break. The tears came flooding out. Alexander pulled her against his chest without hesitation. You're safe. I've got you. Sirens wailed outside. Police flooded the building within minutes. The intruder had left fingerprints on the crowbar, DNA on the dropped scarf. Detective Morrison examined the scene with grim focus. He wasn't trying to hide his identity. This was a message. What kind of message? Alexander asked. That Devlin's network is bigger than we thought, and they're willing to get violent to protect it. The fingerprints came back within hours. Kenneth Walsh, former security consultant for 3 major museums, currently wanted for artifact theft in London and Paris. The laptop he'd stolen contained encrypted files linking Devlin's operation to dealers in Switzerland, Hong Kong, and Dubai. This isn't just fraud anymore, Morrison said the next morning. This is international organized crime. The actual number could be 10 times what we proved from Chicago. Lucia sat in the conference room, exhausted. Around her, law enforcement from 3 countries coordinated. Interpol, FBI art crime team. Ms. Mendoza, an agent from the U.S. Attorney's Office, leaned forward. We need you to testify about the patterns you identified. You're the only person who's traced these connections. The old fear clawed at her throat. Public testimony. Cross-examination. Her credibility attacked again. I'll do it, she heard herself say. Alexander's hand found hers under the table, squeezing gently. The deposition took 3 days. Lawyers from 5 jurisdictions questioned her about every detail. Devlin's defense attorney tried to rattle her, suggesting she was exaggerating to seek revenge. But Lucia had lived with this truth for 3 years. She knew every document, every signature, every inconsistency by heart. The manuscript's provenance certificate shows authentication dated March 15, 2021. But the lab's records show they didn't receive the piece until April 2nd. That 17-day gap is when the forgery occurred. Alexander sat in the gallery every day, silent but present. He didn't speak, didn't interfere, just remained visible, a steady anchor. On the 3rd day, after 6 hours of testimony, the lead prosecutor approached her. You just gave us enough to bring RICO charges. Devlin's looking at 25 years minimum. Lucia nodded, too exhausted to feel victorious. Brian's article hit that evening. The Devlin Network. How a museum director built an international art theft ring worth $400 million. It went viral within hours. Major outlets picked it up. 3 more museum professionals came forward, emboldened by Lucia's testimony. Back at the Foundation's temporary office, Alexander found Lucia staring at salvaged documents. We didn't lose as much as I thought, she said quietly. Most of the critical files survived. The important thing is that you survived. She looked at him. The man who broke in, he could have hurt me. But all I could think was that I couldn't let him destroy this. Couldn't let them win again. You're allowed to be scared. I was terrified. She set down the files. But I'm tired of letting fear decide what I do. This foundation matters more than my fear. Alexander moved closer. You matter more than any of this. The foundation, the case, none of it is worth your safety. Then why are we doing it? Because you chose to. And I'm choosing to stand with you, whatever that means. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning neither was quite ready to name. Alexander sat in his apartment 3 nights after the break-in, staring at his phone. He'd typed and deleted the same message to Lucia 17 times. Finally, he just called. I need to say something now before I lose my nerve. Okay. Lucia's voice was cautious. When Marcus called, when he said someone had broken into the foundation, I couldn't breathe. All I could think was that I'd put you in danger. He paused, and when I got there and saw you on that floor, I realized I'm terrified of losing you. Not because of the case or the foundation, because I can't imagine my life without you in it anymore. Silence stretched between them. Alexander, you don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know. I need to see you. Her voice was quiet but certain. Tomorrow, can we talk? Anywhere. Anytime. They met at Millennium Park the next afternoon. Autumn leaves scattered across the paths. Lucia wore jeans and an old Northwestern sweatshirt. I'm still afraid, she said without preamble. Every time someone gets too close, every time I start to trust, I wait for the betrayal. I know. But I'm tired of living like that. She looked at him directly. You hurt me, twice, and I don't know if I can completely forget that. I'm not asking you to forget. Alexander kept his distance. I'm asking for the chance to build something new. Not to erase the past, but to create a future where trust is possible. That's terrifying. It is. For both of us. Lucia wrapped her arms around herself. I don't know how to let someone in when every instinct says to protect myself. We start small. We're honest about what scares us. We don't rush. Alexander took a step closer. And we give ourselves permission to fail without giving up. What if I can't give you what you need? What if you already do? That evening, Lucia sat in her mother's kitchen, helping sort fabric. Elena worked in comfortable silence, occasionally glancing at her daughter with knowing eyes. You're thinking about him. Is it that obvious? You have the same look I had when I met your father. Terrified and hopeful. Elena set down her scissors. Amor, you've spent 3 years protecting yourself. That's survival. But at some point, survival has to become living. What if he hurts me again? What if he doesn't? Elena took her hands. What if this time, you find someone who sees your worth and fights to keep it? Your heart knows the difference between danger and fear. Trust it. Sam sat across from Alexander in his office, studying him with sharp eyes. You love her. Alexander didn't deny it. I barely know her. You know her where it counts, her character, her courage. Sam leaned forward. Son, that woman breaks through every wall you've built, and it scares you to death. She should be with someone who didn't fail her. She should be with someone who learned, who grew. Sam's voice was firm. Stop punishing yourself and start showing up. Not as a billionaire trying to fix things, as a man willing to be vulnerable. The next morning, Alexander walked into the Sunset Diner alone. The diner went quiet as he approached Lucia, who was refilling sugar dispensers. I need to say something publicly, here, where this started. I accused you, humiliated you, failed you in every way that mattered. His voice carried across the space. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking anyway, not to absolve my guilt, to start building something honest between us. Lucia set down the sugar container. What do you want, Alexander? I don't want to save you. You've already saved yourself. He took a breath. I just want to walk beside you, however long you'll let me. No expectations, no pressure, just us. She studied him for a long moment, weighing the risk, the possibility, the terrifying vulnerability. Slowly, she said finally. Slowly, he agreed. She grabbed her coat. Walk with me. They walked through Chicago's streets as light rain began to fall. Alexander offered his umbrella. Lucia took it, their fingers brushing. Near the river, Brian happened to be passing. He saw them, the billionaire and the curator, walking side by side, and quietly captured the moment. Not for publication, just for the record of something rare. Two people learning to trust again. The city seemed less gray that evening. The rain washed away some of the heaviness. The worst is over, Lucia said quietly. Alexander looked at her, raindrops caught in her hair, resilience in every line of her face. It is. They kept walking, two people who'd survived their worst fears and found something worth protecting on the other side. The courtroom was packed when the verdict came down. On the charges of fraud, theft, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice, we find the defendant, Grant Devlin, guilty on all counts. The gavel struck. Cameras flashed. Devlin's face went white as officers moved to escort him out. 25 years. No possibility of parole for the first 15. Lucia sat in the gallery beside Alexander, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. She'd waited 3 years for this moment, and now that it was here, she felt empty, not victorious, just exhausted. It's over, Alexander said quietly. Is it? He took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. It is. The stolen artifacts began their journey home within weeks. The Byzantine manuscript returned to the Chicago Museum of Heritage. A Renaissance altarpiece went back to Florence, a Ming Dynasty vase to Beijing. 17 museums across 3 continents received pieces they'd thought lost forever. Lucia attended the Chicago ceremony, watching as the manuscript was installed in its proper display case. The museum director, new, carefully vetted, invited her to speak. Preservation isn't just about protecting objects, Lucia said to the gathered crowd. It's about protecting truth, about ensuring that history belongs to everyone, not just those wealthy enough to steal it. She paused, gathering courage. 3 years ago, I tried to protect these pieces and lost everything. Today, I stand here because people believed truth was worth fighting for. That's what preservation really means. The applause was genuine this time. No pity, no scandal, just respect. Alexander stood before the Hawthorne Industries board 6 months after his temporary resignation, presenting his plan to reassume control. I'm not the same CEO who left, he said directly. I've spent 6 months learning what I should have known all along, that integrity isn't optional, that relationships matter more than profit margins, that being right isn't the same as doing right. He pulled up his first slide. Effective immediately, Hawthorne Industries will partner permanently with the Preservation Integrity Initiative. 5% of our annual profits will fund independent audits of every cultural institution we invest in. We'll provide legal protection for whistleblowers, and we'll prioritize ethical practices over convenient ones. Marcus Blackwell, who'd been the most vocal critic, leaned back in his chair. That's going to cost us. In the short term, yes. In the long term, it'll make us the kind of company worth leading. Alexander met each board member's eyes. I'm asking you to trust that doing the right thing is also good business, but if you can't, I'll understand if you want new leadership. The vote was unanimous. He was back. Sam attended the meeting from the gallery, his health fully restored, pride evident in every line of his weathered face. After the vote, he approached his son. Your mother would be proud. Alexander's throat tightened. I hope so. In her small apartment in Pilsen, Elena Mendoza watched the live stream of her daughter's university lecture announcement on her phone, tears streaming down her face. Lucia stood at a podium at Northwestern, accepting a position as adjunct professor of museum studies and cultural preservation, the same university where she'd earned her master's degree before everything fell apart. "I'm honored to return," Lucia said, her voice steady despite the emotion. "Not as the person I was, but as someone who's learned that failure isn't final, that truth matters, that fighting for what's right is always worth it." Elena called immediately after. "Mi amor, I'm so proud of you. I couldn't have done this without you, Mama." "Yes, you could have, but I'm glad you didn't have to." Brian Cole received the Illinois Associated Press Editors Award for Investigative Journalism 3 weeks later. His 4-part series on the Devlin Network had exposed corruption in 17 institutions and led to 8 additional arrests. At the ceremony, he dedicated the award to the woman who kept evidence for 3 years because she believed truth would eventually matter, and to everyone who's been silenced for trying to do the right thing. Lucia attended, sitting beside Alexander in the audience. When Brian looked at them from the stage, she smiled, genuinely, freely, for the first time in years. The teaching offer came with an unexpected request. Would she consider directing a new independent museum focused on ethical preservation practices? Grant funding was secured. Board positions were available. They wanted someone whose integrity was unquestionable. Lucia sat in the foundation office, staring at the formal offer letter. "It's everything I wanted before," she said to Alexander, who'd stopped by with coffee. But I'm afraid of wanting too much, of believing things can actually be this good." Alexander set down the coffee and knelt beside her chair. "You've spent 3 years believing the worst. Maybe it's time to try believing the best." She looked at him, this man who'd failed her, learned from it, and spent months proving he'd changed. "When did you become an optimist?" "When I met someone worth being optimistic about." That evening, after the university announced her dual appointment as professor and museum director, Alexander found Lucia alone in the foundation's small conference room, reviewing architectural plans for the new museum space. He didn't say anything, just walked over and pulled her into an embrace. No urgency, no agenda, just presence. Lucia melted into it, her arms wrapping around his waist, her forehead resting against his chest. They stood like that for a long time. 2 people who'd survived their worst nightmares and found something real on the other side. "We did it," she whispered. "You did it. I just stopped getting in your way." She pulled back enough to look at him. "No, we did it. Together." And for the first time, they both believed that rebuilding wasn't just possible. It was their shared destiny. 6 months later, the Sunset Diner looked different. The neon sign had been repaired. All the letters worked now, glowing warm and steady against the Chicago evening. The windows gleamed, fresh paint-covered walls that had been dingy for years. New booths replaced the cracked vinyl ones, though they'd been carefully chosen to maintain the diner's character. Sarah, still working there, had asked questions when the anonymous donation arrived. The owner had just smiled and said, "Someone who appreciates what this place means." Lucia pushed through the door, the familiar bell chiming. She still worked shifts occasionally, not because she needed the money, but because this place had saved her when she had nothing. She wouldn't abandon it now. Sam sat in his usual booth, no longer frail or lost. He came every Tuesday morning now, driven by Alexander's assistant, dressed in clean clothes that fit properly. But he still ordered the same thing: coffee, eggs, toast. "Morning, mija." Lucia poured his coffee with a smile. "Morning, Sam. The usual?" "You know it." The door opened again. Alexander entered, no bodyguards, no lawyers, no armor of expensive suits. Just jeans, a sweater, and an umbrella tucked under his arm. Rain was forecast for later. He slid into the booth across from his father, and Lucia approached with her order pad. "What can I get you?" Alexander looked up at her, a slight smile playing at his lips. "Coffee, black, and whatever you recommend." "Still trusting my judgment?" "Always." She brought him pancakes, the same thing she'd recommended 6 months ago, when everything had been broken and terrifying. Now it felt like ritual, like home. The foundation had grown beyond their wildest expectations. Offices in 3 cities now, a staff of 15, international partnerships with museums on 4 continents. Lucia split her time between teaching, directing the new museum, and overseeing foundation operations. It was exhausting and exhilarating and exactly what she'd always wanted: Elena had been hired by the Art Institute as a costume consultant for historical exhibitions, her years of experience with period garments finally recognized professionally. She'd cried when they'd offered her the position. Sam had recorded a video testimony for the Foundation's website, speaking directly to camera about how a waitress with nothing had treated him with more dignity than anyone else in his life. "She saved me," he said simply, "in every way that matters." Brian was finishing his documentary, The Price of Truth, The Hawthorne-Devlin Affair. Early screenings suggested it would premiere at Sundance, and Lucia had received an offer that morning that changed everything. Director of the reinstated Chicago Museum of Heritage, fully independent, fully reformed. The same museum where her career had been destroyed. She told Alexander over coffee at the diner. "That's incredible," he said, genuine pride in his voice. "It's terrifying." "That too." He reached across the table, taking her hand. "But you've never let terror stop you before." Sam watched them with knowing eyes. "So, son, when are you going to make an honest woman of her?" Alexander choked on his coffee. Lucia laughed, the sound bright and free. "Subtle, father. I'm 78. I don't have time for subtle." Alexander looked at Lucia, his expression serious despite the moment's levity. "I've been thinking about that, actually." Her heart skipped. "Have you?" "Not marriage, not yet, but..." He took a breath. "I'd like to officially be together. Not hiding it, not keeping it casual. Actually building something real. With all the complications that involves. With all the complications. With the arguments and the fear and the messy reality of two people learning to trust each other." His thumb traced circles on her hand. "I'm not offering perfect. I'm offering honest." Lucia felt tears prick her eyes, not sad ones, but the kind that came from finally believing that good things could last. Honest sounds perfect. They left the diner together as the first drops of rain began to fall. Alexander opened his umbrella, holding it over both of them as they walked toward the future they were building, slowly, carefully, honestly. Behind them, through the repaired window, Sam and Sarah watched them go. "About time," Sarah muttered. Sam just smiled. The Sunset Diner had been many things over the years, a refuge, a witness, a beginning, the place where an invisible woman had saved a lost old man, where a billionaire had learned humility, where truth had been defended when it would have been easier to stay silent, where everything had fallen apart and, eventually, come back together. The neon sign flickered in the rain, steady and bright, marking the spot where it all began, where the truth started, where it was fought for, where, against all odds, it won. Thank you for following this story. If you enjoyed it, please like, comment, and share. Your support means everything. Until next time.